At least the definition part we have studied, like user defined function is what? It is a sub program or a sub module, okay, which will do a particular task. A set of tasks will be done by that particular sub program. We can call it to be a function. Okay, since if such functions are written by the programmer, then we can call such functions as user defined functions. The best example for is the main function, right? The main function in every program we do, right? The definition part, that is after writing the main, within its body, the user writes the statement. Then we can call it to be a one of the user defined function. In the same way, if user wants to write his own functions apart from the main function, then there are certain protocols or the rules what the user has to follow through or the programmer has to follow through. Okay, let us understand those concepts. Pay attention. Okay, these are going to be very crucial points, and if you understand these concepts, then only the further concepts related to any other programming language you will be able to learn. Okay, now few points I will list it out here, and then we will discuss upon those particular points. First, let me write up the syntax or general form of the user defined function. Just you can just observe on the screen. I'm going to type certain content there. Okay. First is return type, then space followed by function name, then within pair of brackets parameter list. Okay, then there is a open flower bracket and then closing flower bracket. Within that there will be some statements like local variable declaration. Okay, then second, the statements of function. Then the third is return statement. Third is return statement. This is the syntax or general form of user defined function. What are the 6 terms written here? First one is, spell it out everyone, read it out. Return type. Second is, third, fourth one, okay. Now all these 6 terms we are going to understand, but here let us try to categorize them into 2 different parts. The first part, actually what we call it as the first line, this particular line what you can see, this is, we usually call it as function header. We call it as function header. Okay, and then after that whatever statements you find between this pair of flower brackets, we call them to be function body. We call them to be function body. The function user defined function, broadly we can specify or categorize it into 2 parts. The first one is function header and second one is function body. In the function header, out of those 6 terms, the first one, return type, function name and parameter list, falls under the category or the sub part called as a function header. And then the local variable declaration and the statements of the particular user defined function and the return statements, we can call them to be the function body or body of the user defined function. Okay, let us try to understand what these terms are. Let's begin with the first one, that is function name. Now, as the name term, this particular term suggests that function name means what? It is a name given by the programmer or user to his user defined function. I'm just writing a keyword like UDF. UDF here means user defined function, but in the exam don't write it. Write it completely user defined function. So the function name is something, and we can call it to be an identifier. We have studied identifier, right? Identifier has certain set of rules. All those rules still holds good for defining or giving the name of the function. That means what? It can have characters, that is alphabets. It can have numbers. It can even have the underscore, right? But it cannot start with the digits. but it can start with the underscore as well as it can start with the alphabets. It should not have any spaces. All the rules of the user, the identifier still holds good for the name of this particular function. Okay, then the second one is the return type. Is the return type. Return type means, suppose if this particular function is doing certain task, and once it does that particular task, is it giving something back to the its calling function? We will understand what calling function is. Return type means the, what happened? It's, I think you are able to see it, right? Okay. Return type, this return type is what? It is the type of the value, or it's the data type of the value which this particular function is returning back. You can see the return type. Type here you can think of it is type of a database, data type, right? It could be integer, it could be float, it could be double, or it could be character. Any type of the data type, that particular value it is returning back. That we need to specify as the return type. And the third one is the parameter list. Parameter list means, suppose if this particular user defined function is accepting certain values or accepting certain variables from the calling function, then we mention all those variables as the parameter list. This parameter list should be enclosed within the parenthesis. Okay, these type of brackets, what you find here, these we usually call them to be a parenthesis. Inside this parenthesis, we need to specify those variables along with its declaration. Declaration means, suppose if the function is taking an integer value, then we need to specify it to be like within the brackets, say int x. Suppose if it is taking one value of the integer data type, then we will specify it to be int x. Suppose if it is taking two values of the same integer data type, then again we need to specify in the parameter list, like this is the first one and the second one is again integer, then again we need to specify a separator as a comma and then int y. Even though this x and y both are belong to the same data type, they have to be explicitly defined separately as its own data types. We can't write something like this, int x comma y. This is an violation. It gives us an error. This y is not declared to be any data type. So we have to mandatorily specify a int here. Suppose if this particular parameter list consists of three variables, like one more of floating variable, then how can we specify them? A comma, then float, say f. So these we call them to be the parameter list. It is a list of parameters that a user defined function is accepting from the calling function. These are going to be the values which will be passed by the calling function. Since those values will be having a set of data types, those data types we need to specify here in the same sequence. Okay, understood this one? Yes? Okay, then. The fourth one is the local variable declaration. Like in the main function, so for the programs what we have written, suppose in the main function we might be requiring certain variables, then we do write the declaration part of that, like int a, b, c or float f. So all those variables, suppose if the user defined function requires certain variables to be defined, to be declared inside that, then those have to be taken care in the local variable declaration part. All the local variables which we require by that particular function has to be declared under the section called as local variable declaration. Once that is done, then the fifth part will be the functions, that the statements which that particular function has to be written. All the statements we need to mention over there. All the statements like what that particular function will do. Okay, if it is as simple as adding two numbers, to add two numbers, what are the corresponding statements are required? All the statements should be written as part of the statements of the function. All the executable statements have to be written in the statement of the function part. Once that is done, then the last is the return statement. Return statement means if the function is returning some value, so that particular value have to be written. Like if a function is returning value 1, then we have to mention it to be return 1. return 1. 1 means the function is going to return some value. Always the return statements are written using the keyword called as return. Already you have come across with this particular term, right? In the main function, the last statement we write it as return 0. Why 0 is there? What is the data type of 0? What is the data type of 0 number? Integer, right? So if you just look into the function header of main, before main, what we write there? Int we write. Now why that is written as an int? Because the function is returning some value, and that value's data type is going to be integer. So the main function's return type is int. In the same way, if a function is returning some value, okay, then that statement have to be written under the return. It need not to be always 1. We can involve certain expressions like, suppose if a plus b I want to return, then return a plus b can be written there. Okay, so these are the 6 important terms of the user defined function. First, we can categorize them into 2 parts. What is the first part? Function header. Read it loudly. What is the first part? Function header. Second part? Function body. How many subsections or the subparts it has now? 6. What are the parts of function header? What are the parts of function body? Yes. Now, is there any relation between return type and the return statement? What is that? The data type of the value which is being returned by the function, that corresponding data type has to be written in the return type here. Okay, like how every variable we have a certain type associated with that, like an integer, float, double, character. In the same way, the functions also have got its own types. That type is defined by what type of the value that particular function returns back. Okay, now there is a small, term here, like if a function is returning an integer value, if the function is returning an integer value, then we usually don't mention any type here. We just keep it as blank. That is acceptable only in C programming language. But as a standard practice, what we do is that even the function is returning integer value, we will specify it to be int here. Okay, now let us see an example how a user defined function looks like by writing all these 6 terms in that. Consider an example of, say, I want to write an user defined function to add two numbers. I want to write a user defined function which will add 2 numbers. Okay, now first part is that function header I need to specify. Function header means what it consists of? Return type, function name, parameter list. Suppose I want to define such a way that it is going to return a value which is sum of the numbers, and the sum of the number I assume to be an integer value. Then what will be the return type? Integer, that is int. Then I need to give a name to the user defined function, right? Now, shall I write it as like add 2 numbers as my user defined function name? Shall I write like this? No. Why? Spaces are there because the rules of an identifier doesn't hold good if I write like this. So how shall I remove this one? Either remove the spaces or just simply write a 1-word function like add. You can write capital letters or you can write a small letters. No problem in that one. So I will mention it to be addition. Now, is this a valid function name now? Yes. What is the third part of the header? Parameter list. Parameter lists are enclosed within the parenthesis, right? Now, to add 2 numbers, how many values I require? 2 values. If I assume it to be an integer values, then how shall I write this first statement here? Int a, comma, int b. Right? So I want to this particular function want to accept 2 values. of the integer data type. So those have to be stored in this function. So we require some variables. Those variable declaration is done here. Only the declaration part is done in the list of parameters. So we have so far written the function header. Then I need to specify the body of the function that has to be written within the braces or flower brackets. Now, what are the three parts of this the body of the function? Local variable declaration. Now, do you think that do we require some variables here? I want to calculate what? Addition of two numbers, right? So to store that number, the sum number, I require one variable, right? So I can write it as something like int sum, right? So this will be considered as the local variable with respect to this particular function, right? Then second part of the body of the function is what? Statements of this particular function. So this function is going to do what? Add two numbers. What are those two numbers? A and B. Those values are stored into A and B, and I'm going to calculate this A plus B here. A plus B I will calculate, and that result I'm going to update in sum. So sum is equals to A plus B will happen. So since here I don't want to print or on this particular function, I want to pass this value, or I want to return this particular sum value to the function which it has been called for. Then the last statement I need to write. What is that? Return statement. Now, how to write the return statement? By using the keyword return, right? Return. Okay. Now I need to specify some value here. What value I need to specify here? Whatever the sum I have calculated, in which variable this sum is stored? By the variable sum. So return sum and then semicolon. Now look at here, all those 6 parts of the user defined functions are written here. What this function will do now? If I call this function by passing two values, then the sum of those two values will be calculated and will be returned by the function. In this one, the name of the function is addition, return type is integer, and list of parameters are 2, and both have been declared in within the parenthesis. Okay, then the second part, that is the body of the function. In the body of the function, we have written or taken care of all the 3 statements. First one is local variable declaration. Second is the set of statements that belong to the function. And the third is the return statement. Understanding? Yes? Okay. Now suppose here, instead of the addition, I want to calculate something like average. I want to calculate average of the two numbers which I am passing here. Then I will assume that the values which I am taking here will be integer data type. So I will specify it to be parameter list as int a comma int b. But I want to calculate the average here. Then how do I calculate here? What are the corresponding statements we'll be requiring here? Can you tell me? Float AVG, okay, then AVG equals to A plus B divided by 2. Is this correct? Will this particular statement calculate the average? No, right? If you look into the expression here, you have addition and division. Which one has got the highest priority? Division. So first A divided by B will take in place, and then it will be added into A. But that is not the thing we require, right? What we want? A plus B has to be done first. So we can specify here A plus B. Correct? And then do the division. Now, what is the data type of this sum which gets calculated? Integer. And what is this data type of this number? Integer. So integer divided by integer produces integer value. But what we want? Float value. Then how to typecast here? 0.0. Very good. Now we have calculated the average. Now I want to return this average value. Then how it has to be done? Return AVG. Okay. Now, are there any errors or are there any problems in this one? float there. Now, the return type of the function and the return statement are closely related, right? Because the type of the value what we are passing or returning, the corresponding return type has to be specified as part of the function header. But here function header specifies that integer, but we are returning what? Float value. There is a mismatch. Then how can we resolve this one? By changing this integer to float. Followed? Understood? Yes? Now, let us try to write a simple program, okay, and try to understand how this particular user-defined function have to be incorporated. Okay, now, before that, let us understand two more concepts here. Is this understood? Are there any difficulties so far? Online students, are you following? Can someone confirm me? Okay, fine. Now, whenever user-defined functions are written, the syntax is what? The syntax is for the user, or we can say syntax of defining user-defined function. This is the syntax for defining user-defined function. When a user wants to, or a programmer wants to include this user-defined function, three set of statements or three parts he has to write. The first very essential part is the user-defined function itself, or the definition itself. That is something written as this. Okay, this is the first piece of, or the first code which a user has to write. Apart from this, the programmer or user has to take care of few more things. Okay, those are called as function prototype, or sometimes we call it to be function declaration. Function declaration. Okay, and the other one is we call it to be function call. Sorry. Function call. Now, prototype. What do you think of prototype? Set up? No, I don't want to relate as of now with the programming concepts. When you hear this word prototype, so what you think of? Basic model of a project or something. Very good. Anybody else? Have you seen anywhere like a big construction is going to be happening, and the engineer related to that particular building, before he starts developing or building the actual that particular building, what he does, he just prepares a model, right? And he just places in front of the customer, or he will say that, or he or she will say that, okay, this is the way how your building will look like, a model, right? Can we call it to be a prototype? Right? You can say it is a non-functioning body, but it will just depict that how it is going to be look once it is built, right? In the same way, in the programming concepts, user is going to write a user-defined function in this way. User or the programmer is going to define the function in this way, but before he writes this one, he has to tell to the compiler that, okay, this user-defined function will be looking something like this. That statement, we call it to be the function prototype or function declaration. This function declaration usually written before writing the main function. Okay, that is something after writing the hash define, those hash include statements, and then before writing the main function, the function prototype has to be written. How this function prototype looks like? It consists of three things. Let's say four things probably, precisely. First is return type. Second is function name. And third is parameter list. And fourth one is semicolon. Now, Can you match or can you try to figure it out the common thing between this statement, that is prototype statement, with respect to the function header? This is the function header, right? And this is the function prototype. Are they similar? Almost of the parts are similar there. But what is different? Semicolon. So as I said, the prototype means it is going to tell to the compiler that there will be an user defined function in the program and it is going to look like this. How? First is name of the function. Second is what value it is going to return. Third is the list of parameters or the values which it will accept. And since it is a prototype, we have to terminate by providing a semicolon. So all the statements which are essential to identify user-defined function are listed in this particular statement, wherein the name is given, the return type is given, and the list of parameters is given. What it does, that will be given inside the body of the function later when it is defined. But before it is defined, we have to tell to the compiler saying that, okay, your function, there will be a user-defined function in the program, and that is going to look like this. Followed? Yes or no? Any doubts here? Okay. Now, the third aspect is the function call. Okay. Now, and to understand function call, let us say that we are writing a program. Okay, like say hash include, okay, stdio.h. Okay, then there is a int main and there is a its corresponding body. Now I want to think that I want to write a user defined function here. So the things which we have studied so far, that is function prototype and the function definition. As I said, function prototype has to be written before main function and after hash include stdio.h statement. That is somewhere in middle I have to write here. Okay, so I want to write a function prototype here, which will look like, suppose I want to add two numbers. So it is going to return an integer value, so int, and the name of the function addition I will specify, and list of the parameter. Here in the list of the parameter, how I'm going to write is that I will say that it is going to take two values. Right? It is going to take two values. What type of the values? Integer values. So I will say that since it is a prototype, it will take first value of the data type int. Then I need not to provide the variable name here. I need not to provide the variable name. Rather, I can just provide a semicolon and one more int here. That specifies that to the compiler, there will be an function by the name addition, which returns integer value, which accepts how many arguments? Two arguments. What will be the data type? Integer data type. So to the compiler, it is instructing that a kind of a prototype, it is telling that, okay, there will be a function by the name addition, which is going to return an integer value and which will accept two parameters. Right? And all those parameter data type is going to be what? First one is integer, second one is integer. So according to this, the user is going to write the definition. So the definition, let me take it. Okay. No worries. Let me write it once again here. So int. Now, suppose if I write something like this here. Okay. Then int, say x, int y, then its definition I'm going to write here. Now say int sum, and then sum equals to x plus y, and then it is going to return a value, say return sum. Okay, now will there be any issues here?
The function name, sir.
Function name. Now look at here. We have instructed to the compiler that there will be an user defined function by the name addition. Is there any function by the name addition here with the same these characters? No. That means whenever we write a user-defined function, the name, whatever we have given in the prototype, should be exactly same as this way. Even if I write a capital letter A, will these two be same or different? Different, because it is case sensitive. So always the name of the function which is given in the prototype should be same as the name given in the function header. Okay, now, so far is it understood? Yes, now. Prototype we have written, function definition we have written, but something, the third set or the third part we are going to write is function call. Function call means we need to call this user defined function by some other function. Like this main function will always be called by the operating system. Okay, in the same way, once this main function is called, or when the program starts execution, it will enter into the main and the corresponding statements will be written. Like here I require some variables like int a, okay, and b. I will initialize a value to be 10 and b value to be 20. Okay, now these two values, sum I want to calculate, and this sum I want to calculate by calling this addition function. I want to calculate the sum of this a and b by calling the addition function here. Then I need to write a statement which should call the user defined function. Okay, to write this one, we need to specify the name of the function. What is the name of the function here? Addition. Okay, now within the parenthesis here, I need to specify the list of values or the parameters. How many parameters this particular addition function is taking? 2. What are those? 2 values, right? Those 2 values, where are they stored in the main function? A and B. So now here, should I pass as int a comma int b here? No, because already this a is declared as integer, b is also declared as integer. So I want to make use of those existing variables. Simply, I will call it as a comma b, and then a semicolon. Now, what it makes, this particular statement is now can be called as the function call. Function call means now it specifies the name of the function. Is it same as the function prototype here? Yes. Now, is it passing 2 parameters as defined in the declaration or the prototype? Yes. Are they both integer? Yes. Right? Now, this part we have validated, but there is something before this addition, that is name. There is a return value. Means when this function is executed or called, it will call what? The addition function. Now understand the flow of execution here. Flow of execution means the control, how the flow or the execution or the statements will be executed here. It starts from main. Okay, now let's learn 2 more terms here. Let me write it over here. Calling function and something called as called function. Okay, now main will start its execution. Then it starts from the top of the line, it proceeds in the downwards, and then it encounters one statement. What this statement is? Function call. Function call means now the flow of execution will say that there is a function call, means the flow, it has to stop here and it has to continue where? Its definition. Where is the definition of this addition? It's over here. So the execution from here, it will now skip to the function definition. So in the function definition, there are 2 parameter values here, right? What is value? X. Second one is Y. 2 variables are there. So now what will be the value of this X now? It will be the value of the variable which we are passing in the function call. The first value. What is the first variable here? A. What is the value of A? 10. So the value 10 will now be stored in the value or the variable X. Okay. Then secondly, there is an int Y. Means why this int Y is actually written? Because in the function call, we are passing one more variable's value. What is the value? 20. Since we are passing this 20, then there should be some container, a variable, which should store this value. So that is written here int Y. Now what this Y will store now? 20. So both the 10 and 20 are now placed in X and Y respectively. Then the statements, these statements will be executed. So initial, that is declaration of sum will happen, and then sum is equals to X plus Y will happen, and then there is a return sum. So 10 plus 20 will be calculated, and that 30 will be now returned back from this called function. Now, why we specified them to be something called as a calling function and a called function? Can you think of it? This main, I specified it to be calling function, and this addition, I specified it to be a called function. Why? Because this addition is being called by whom? Main. So is that main is calling someone? Right? So this main function is calling somebody, right? So I will specify, I can call this main to be a calling function. To whom it is calling? Addition. So shall I tell this to be a addition function as a called function? Yes. So always remember that two terms, calling function and called function. Calling function is the function in which there is an function call statement. Called function is the function which actually represents the definition of the user defined function. Okay. Now the return sum means it is going to return some value. What value? The sum. So this return, it is returning 30. So the control is from here, it is going to again switch back to the calling function here. Since this addition, when I call, it is calculating the sum and it is returning that sum value. Since it is returning that 30, I have to store I have to store that particular value in the calling function. So here I require one more variable. Let me call it as, say, add. So that add, I will write it as add equal to now. Okay. Now, why this calling function is written like this? Because this addition function is going to return some value. That value has to be stored. To store that value, we have taken an variable add. If you look at the data type of this add is what? Integer. Why only integer? Because this function is returning some value of the type integer. So the integer variable is being taken. And once that is done, then later we can just display a statement like printf, okay, that addition is equals to %d, and we can specify add here. Okay, I will once again explain all these things. Have patience. Online students.